Hello everyone, Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about A Christmas Carol. So we're reading through Stave 3, and we had got to this paragraph in the last video. I had read it, but I haven't explained it, so I'm going to do that now. Okay, so just a reminder that the second spirit has led Scrooge to Bob Cratchit's house. So do you remember who Bob Cratchit is? He's the clerk, Scrooge's employee, and we're now watching the Cratchit family get ready for Christmas lunch or dinner. And so there's Mrs. Cratchit, and twice turned gown, meaning that it's second hand, it's been remade twice over, which shows how poor they are. I mean, in the old days, people did used to kind of repair things and not automatically throw things away and buy new things. But even so, this does show that she's quite very poor. Now, brave in ribbons. If you don't try to interpret that too literally, word by word. So it's a metaphor, and it simply means that she's doing the best she can, making the best of a bad job or a poor job. So she's got this second-hand gown, and she's decorated it with ribbons, which are cheap and they make a good show for sixpence. I mean, even sixpence is quite a lot of money because remember, a bob is a shilling, which is 5p, and he only gets 15 of those a week. So even sixpence is actually quite a lot. And then she lays the tablecloth, helped by her daughter, one of her daughters, who's also wearing ribbons, and we can assume that her dress is also second-hand. And then this is the son, and he's testing whether the potatoes are done. And he's wearing a shirt collar. So in those days, the shirt and the collar would be separate. So this actually belongs to his father, who's to confer means to give, to pass down to his son and heirs. Heir is the person who inherits from the father. So his father has passed down his shirt collar to his son. So again, that's also secondhand in a way. And he actually manages to get the shirt collar in his mouth, but he's really, really happy to have inherited this shirt collar. So gallant also means brave, but again, which kind of links back to this brave here. Obviously, it's not really bravery as such, it's just a metaphorical way of saying that he's very happy. To yearn means to really want something, and linen is like a type of cloth that this collar is made of. So linen is like cotton, but it's not actually cotton. Not that you need to worry about that. And he wants to go out and show off his shirt collar in the parks. And now the two children, boy and girl, they come running in and saying that they can smell the goose. So goose. So in those, so obviously turkey is what people we normally have for Christmas, and in those days as well. But turkey would have been expensive, so they're having goose instead, which is cheaper. And bask means to kind of bathe in, metaphorically. Luxurious, luxury means like really nice things. Sage and onion. So this is a herb. So because this is kind of cheap and not as good as turkey, they're making it nicer with sage and onion. So again, making the best of with what they've got, and they're dancing. So you can see, despite all the poverty, despite that fact that they're having things which are a bit cheaper than everybody else, they're still happy, and that's the point that Dickens is make. That even though they're poor, as a family, they're happy. They're making the most of what they've got, and they praise the older brother to the skies for cooking and so on. And then this brackets here, don't worry too much about not proud. This is just metaphorical language from Dickens trying to paint a picture of this happy family. So his collar is almost choking him, and he's banging on the fire to get it going again and making sure that the potatoes are done. And then here we've got more personification that the potatoes are knocking loudly to be let out and peeled to be eaten. In other words, that they want to join in with the happiness. They want to join in with the family. Okay, let's carry on. What has ever got your precious father then? Said Mrs. Cratchit, and your brother, Tiny Tim, and Martha weren't as late last Christmas Day by half an hour. Here's Martha, mother, said a girl, appearing as she spoke. Here's Martha, mother, cried the two young Cratchits. Hurrah! There's such a goose, Martha. Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are, said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times and taking off her shawl and bonnet for her with officious zeal. We'd a deal of work to finish up last night, replied the girl, and had to clear away this morning, mother. Well, never mind so long as you are come, said Mrs. Cratchit. Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm, Lord bless you. So this is fairly straightforward. So they're waiting for the father, he's late, and they're wondering why he's late. And Tiny Tim. So Tiny Tim is very important. We'll find out more about him in a minute. And Martha is the older sister, so they're wondering why she's late. But she actually appears now. The little girl says, "Oh, here's Martha," and the two little children greet their older sister. And this here, there's such a goose, meaning, oh, we've got a lovely goose to eat for Christmas. They're telling their older sister what they're going to have for Christmas. And the mother greets her and kisses her. Shawl is like a big scarf that you put around your shoulders. Bonnet is a hat. Officious means like over eager, and zeal is energy. So she's just really pleased to see her daughter. And the girl says, "Oh, we had a lot of work to finish up, and then we had to clear up this morning." And Mrs. Cratchit says, "Never mind all that. Come and sit by the fire." Have a warm just means get warm. It doesn't literally mean anything. It's just the way they spoke in those days. "No, no, there's father coming," cried the two young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. "Hide, Martha, hide." So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. "Why, where's our Martha?" cried Bob Cratchit, looking around. "Not coming," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not coming?" said Bob, with a sudden declension in his high spirits, for he had been Tim's blood horse all the way from church, and had come home rampant. "Not coming upon Christmas Day?" Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door, and ran into his arms, while the two young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off into the wash-house, that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. Okay, so this page is fairly straightforward. The father now comes and they are going to play hide and seek. So Martha is going to pretend that she's not there. Then Martha is the older sister, remember? And the father comes in, little Bob, meaning that he's probably fairly short. And comforter is long scarf. So it's a very long scarf. And the fringe at the bottom, obviously like a thread, decorative threads at the ends of the scarf hanging down. So threadbare means worn out. So again, his clothes are very poor as well. And darned up means mended. So again, his clothes are second-hand and repaired to look good for the season, for Christmas. Tiny Tim is another child of theirs, but and the last means to be sad for something. And he's got crutch and his limbs supported by an iron frame, so he's disabled. And then the father says, "Oh, where's Martha?" And so they're joking with him. And the mother says, "Oh, she's not coming." And he's saying, "What? Not coming?" So obviously he's really been looking forward to seeing his daughter. Declension means to decline. So his high spirits, his happiness go down. So remember, so the older daughter's married, they live separately, and the chances are maybe they don't see each other that often because everybody's always busy working. And he's been carrying Tiny Tim from church on his shoulders because he can't walk. Rampant means flourishing, spreading, but here it's just being used metaphorically to suggest that Bob was full of energy and happiness. to come home to the family, and especially to see the older daughter who he doesn't see all the time. Not coming on Christmas Day, and he must look really really disappointed because although it's meant to be a joke, so Martha comes out early and hugs him, and the two younger children they take their young brother Tiny Tim to the bathroom, which is presumably near the kitchen, so they can hear the he can hear the pudding singing in the copper pot. Yeah. So obviously, what technique is this? The pudding singing personification. And how did little Tim behave? Asked Mrs. Cratchit, when she had rallied Bob on his credulity, and Bob had hugged his daughter to his heart's content. As good as gold, said Bob, and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this, and trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and came back, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool before the fire. And while Bob, turning up his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, and stirred it round and round, and put it on the hob to simmer. Master Peter and the two ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Okay, so this page is fairly straightforward as well, but let's just go through it. So the mother is just asking how little Tim behaved in church. Rally means to kind of reinvigorate, to encourage Bob, the father, on his credulity. So credulity means when you believe something too easily. So it's referring to the fact that he believed that Martha, his daughter, would not come on Christmas Day, and he now hugged her to his heart's content. Here we have a simile to say that Tiny Tim was very well behaved, and even though he's tiny, and so Tiny Tim obviously means that he's physically tiny as well, but he's a very thoughtful little boy. And he told me that when the people saw him, that he was a cripple. So we don't normally use this word nowadays, but they obviously did then. And he's saying that when people saw him, hopefully they reminded them of someone who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. So who is he talking about? He's talking about Jesus Christ, isn't he? And then Bob's voice trembles when he's telling this story, and it trembles even more when he says that Tiny Tim is growing strong and hearty, healthy. And obviously, he doesn't really believe this, and it's not true. He's just trying to convince himself. So remember also that there would have been no national health service in those days, and they're kind of left to their own devices, really, in terms of this little boy. But the little boy is very active, and they can hear him, his little crutch, and then he comes back accompanied by his brother and sister to his stool, and Bob turning up his cuff. So his shirt cuffs, and he turns them up so that they don't get dirty. But here, Dickens is saying, so shabby means dirty. He's saying that actually they're already so dirty, it wouldn't really make any difference. So dirty in the sense that not necessarily physically dirty, but it's just so old. He's mixing up this mixture, so it's probably some kind of mulled wine, and stirring it and then putting it on the cooker to boil gently. And then the older brother, the older son, and ubiquitous means to be everywhere. So they're running around, and it seems as though they're everywhere. They go to get the goose and then return in high possession. I mean, this is just metaphorical language from Dickens to say how happy they are to have goose to eat. So remember, a lot of people may not have had anything to eat on Christmas Day or any day for that matter. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought a goose the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon to which a black swan was a matter of course, and in truth there was something very like it in that house. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter smashed the potatoes with incredible vigour. Miss Belinda sweetened up the apple sauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it in the breast. But when she did, and when the long expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all round the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" Okay, so bustle means to move around in excitement, and Sue means to start. So Dickens is making it clear here that goose, they are not rare. Okay, so goose would have been very common, but for the Cratchits, even to have goose is rare. So rare means something that doesn't happen very often, and they're only having it because it's Christmas. And phenomenon meaning again something exceptional, and as though it's like a black swan. So obviously most swans are white in this country, very few black swans. In Australia, actually, they do have more black swans. But anyway, point being that they think the goose is rare, and for them it is, but actually it's not. And so this is what Dickens is saying here. So the rest is fairly straightforward. The mother makes the gravy, hissing hot. What techniques are there? At least two. So alliteration and onomatopoeia. The older boy mashes the potatoes with energy, great energy, and the second sister apple sauce. So they're all. I mean, we don't need to know all this, but the point is they're all acting as behaving as a family, all happy together, everybody doing their thing, and the father takes Tiny Tim to the corner. The two young children set chairs for everybody, so everybody's helping out, not forgetting chairs for themselves, mounting guard. So this is just Dickens being humorous. And then they cram spoons into their mouths, lest they should scream before their turn came. So in other words, they're starving, they can't wait, but they have to wait for their turn. And so they say grace. Uh, so to say grace means to thank God for the food you're about to get. So in those days, that would have been quite common. It's not so common nowadays. And then they all kind of wait, and the mother looks around, takes the knife, and prepares to plunge it. So put it into the goose to cut it up, and then the stuffing comes out, gushes out, and they're all delighted. And even Tiny Tim beats on the table with his knife and cries "Hurrah!" So, like I say, there's a long descriptions here by Dickens. You don't need to analyze every single line and word. So, why do you think Dickens gives these long descriptions? It's because he wants to show how important family life is. The length of time a writer spends on something is an indication of the importance of that topic. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to analyze every single line of it. There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by apple sauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last, yet every one had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular was steeped in sage and onion, to the eyebrows. But now the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Okay, so here they carry on admiring the goose and how they've never seen such a thing or tasted such a thing. Tender means soft. So they're all admiring it. And then it says that it was enough for the whole family. But actually, this word eat means to stretch out, to make do with what you've got. This actually shows, and this is the sort of word level analysis that you should do, that actually it wasn't enough. Okay. And you can see small atom of bone. So in other words, they've eaten every bit, and she's saying, "Oh, look, we haven't even eaten all of it." So you can see here, it actually wasn't enough for the whole family. Even when it says that it was enough, it wasn't really. And here, the fact that they so steep means completely covered up or full of in sage and onion. So they've eaten the onions and everything, right? Because the goose wasn't enough. And then as the one of the daughters changes the plates for pudding, Mrs. Cratchit leaves alone to get the pudding. She doesn't want anybody with her because she's nervous about the pudding. We'll see that in a minute. So she's going to bring the pudding alone. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with the goose, a supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Hallo! A great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like a washing day. That was the cloth. A smell like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other, with a laundress's next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed, but smiling proudly with the pudding, like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Oh, a wonderful pudding! Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind. She would confess she had had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everybody had said something, everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. So she's worried that it might not be enough, might have broken, somebody might have stolen it, and at that suggestion, the little children become very, very angry that somebody might steal their pudding. But then it turns out everything's fine. All this steam, the pudding is so big that it's coming out of the copper pot, and the smell like washing day. So a Christmas pudding is wrapped in cloth when it's being cooked, and then smell of pastry and so on, and that's the pudding. So the pudding is obviously smelling nice, like pastry. And then Mrs. Cratchit enters, and she's red and but smiling proudly. And speckled means spotted. So this might be the raisins and all the other things that go into a Christmas pudding. Cannonball. So obviously cannon is like the big guns, and the ball comes out of there. So obviously simile there. And half a quartern. So a quartern is a quarter of a pint. Half of that is an eighth, and half of that is a 16th. So obviously Dickens indirectly telling us. So of ignite means to put on fire. Brandy. So that's how Christmas pudding is cooked. So obviously they didn't have much brandy. This means adorned or decorated with holly. Oh, what a wonderful pudding! So they're going to really congratulate the mother and each other. And this is obviously just a bit of humor and exaggeration here. That is the greatest success by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. And she's saying, "Oh, thank God, I was worried." about the quantity of flour. So again, indirectly, Dickens is showing us how poor the family is, but despite everything, they're happy, they accept it, they thank God for the little that they've got. And everybody said nice things about it, but nobody said that it was small, which obviously implies it was too small for the large family, just like the goose was not enough for this big family. Heresy means to go against religion or God, and obviously, and any of the Cratchits would have blushed to even suggest that it was too small. At last, the dinner was all done, the cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up, the compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect. Apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family grew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half a one, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, two tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and cracked noisily. Then Bob proposed. Okay, so the dinner's cleared up. Hearth is the fireplace and the bit in front of the fireplace as well. They clean it all up. They drink the mulled wine or taste it, and they say it's perfect. They've got apples and oranges and chestnuts, and then they kind of sit around the fire in a semicircle. So a circle or meaning half at once. So that's a semicircle. And the family display of glass are basically two tumblers. So a tumbler is a glass, a long glass without handles, and a custard cup. Now, custard cup is supposed to have a handle, but this one doesn't. It's broken. And but he says that they're just as good as golden goblets. So a goblet is a drinking glass, but like a fancy one. And so then again, just Dickens making the point that they're making the most of what they've got. Sputtered and cracked. What what kind of words are those? Onomatopoeia. And then he's going to propose a toast. But that's a good point to stop this video. So I'll stop there. And as always, if you found this video useful, please do subscribe and tell all your friends about it. And we're about halfway through Stave 3. So see you in the next video to continue with Stave 3.